It's time for the Douglas Coleman Show. Mr. Smooth and Savvy is joined by guests from all walks of life. From the entertainment industry to authors to political and social commentators. The famous and not so famous. The controversial and the light and fluffy. We have it all. Now, here is Douglas Coleman.
Welcome to the Douglas Coleman Show. It's me, Douglas Coleman. How are ya? This is going to be the fastest intro you've probably ever heard on this show because both interviews ran long, and anybody who knows me knows I hate to edit good content. So I've got about 30 seconds. We've got two guests today. Peter Desberg is first up. He is a licensed clinical psychologist, and he's written a book called Now That's Funny, in which he interviewed some of the top comedy writers in the business and got an idea of their writing process. He will be up first, followed by Loren Weisman, who is a brand precision marketing strategist and counselor. And if you don't know what that is, stick around to the second half of the show, and Loren will explain exactly what that is and what he does. We will be right back with Peter Desberg. Okay, please welcome my guest, Peter Desberg. Hi, Peter. How are you?
Good. You?
Doing very well.
Good. That'll make our interview so much better.
Yeah, doing fine. Now, let's see.
And if it helps, I'm holding the book up now, if that helps at all.
Oh, well, all right. This is audio only, so we'll have to imagine the book cover. But it's good in spirit, I think. And let's see. You are a licensed clinical psychologist, and you've also written a book called Now That's Funny. Co-writer Jeffrey Davis, correct?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Why don't you tell us a little bit about your background, and then we'll talk about the book.
Absolutely. Well, let's see. Way too many years as a boring college professor, which I guess is redundant. And I'm a clinical psychologist specializing in working with people who have stage fright. Not how to get it, but how to get rid of it, and spend a lot of my time writing.
Okay, so is that what you've been doing your whole life, basically, was helping people get over stage fright?
All of that, but also I'm also a singer-songwriter. I would like to say it like you, but I just heard you play, so you're better at it than I am, but that's another one of the many things that we spend our time on. Okay,
so how did you get involved with Jeffrey Davis? Have you known him a long time?
Actually, it's kind of an interesting story.
Okay.
Jeffrey's son and my daughter were in the 8th grade at the same time, and one night they were having a play date, and he had to come pick up his son. So he's sitting in his car honking the horn, waiting for his son to come down, hoping he doesn't have to come up and get him and go through another conversation. Hi, my name's Jeffrey. What do you do? We all dislike those talks. But he had to, so he came up, and we started chatting and found that we were, first of all, both academicians, and then also with a long background in comedy. And I had told him about a book I'd started before, interviewing comedy writers, and all of a sudden he sat up and he said, "Who are the writers?" And as I mentioned each one, his eyes got bigger and bigger, and he said, "Every one of these comedy writers you're talking about were legendary in their time. And every week, they played poker at my house around my crib with my father."
Wow.
Jeffrey's father was a very famous comedy writer. So within about, I'd say, 20 minutes of walking in the door and me telling him about this project, he jumped off the couch and said, "Let's do it."
Well, that is really interesting. So it was just a chance meeting because your kids went to school together.
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
Absolutely.
Okay. I did want to ask you one thing about your work as a clinical psychologist. Sure. You talk about, or on your bio it says that you work with the psychology of humor. Now, what is the psychology of humor exactly?
Well, I don't know if we can say the F word on the radio, but I spent a lot of time talking about Freud and humor. People don't know that he wrote a book called Jokes and Their Relation to the Unconscious. And so we talk a lot about the motivation for humor. And then we also look at the cognitive side of humor. What is it that actually makes something funny? What's the actual construction of jokes? One of the things that I've done is with a friend who's a stand-up comedy coach in Santa Monica, we've actually written an interactive piece of software that teaches people how to create jokes.
Well, that's interesting. I was always under the impression by some of the comics that I've had on the show that they always stressed that timing was as important as content. Would you agree with that or not?
Absolutely. The interesting thing is the most important thing, the expression I like that I heard was establishing the spirit of fun. I'm sure that you've had occasions where you've told a joke that you think is really funny in a situation where it's very, very flat, and other times where you've gotten people to laugh at the silliest things because they were in that kind of mood. So the trick is to establish that mood. That becomes huge.
Okay, but let's talk a little bit about comedic timing, because people in the business tend to think that it's kind of a natural ability, like acting or singing perhaps, that it's difficult to teach comedic timing. Would you agree with that?
Jeffrey, absolutely. I mean, let me say yes or no. Jeffrey is the chair of screenwriting at Loyola Marymount University, which is one of the top film schools in the country. And we have talks about this all the time. And it comes to this. You can teach craft, but you can't teach talent.
Okay.
So I can teach you how to take a joke and edit it to make it as funny as it can possibly be. That doesn't mean you'll get a laugh with it. But again, it also has it's a way of looking at things. I'll give you an example from from one of the interviews in the book. Elliot Schoenman, who was the showrunner for Home Improvement, among other things, was telling us a story. He said, my father committed suicide. He jumped off a bridge. And so a couple of years after that, I went back to New York, got my sister, and we took the cab ride from his office to the bridge where he jumped. He said, you couldn't imagine a heavier emotional moment. And as I was sitting in this taxi, this incredibly emotional moment, I started thinking to myself, my father was a German Jew and kind of cheap. I wonder how much he tipped the cab driver on the way to his own suicide.
Well, that is funny in a kind of morbid sort of way, yeah.
Well, but what you think about is it's a way of looking at the world, and it's a way of seeing things. And for me, as somebody who writes comedy, the first rule you learn is punches are easy, it's all setups. You know, even back in the days of old comedy teams, you know, Martin, Lewis, Abbott, Costello, the straight man always got paid more than the funny guy because it's harder to do the setups. And when you're writing jokes, if I get a good setup, I can give you 10 punches for it. But coming up with a good setup is the whole trick.
One of the people that I've always liked, and as a kid I used to just love watching his show, was Jack Benny. I thought he had the most amazing comedic timing.
So you talk about Jack Benny and you talk about timing. Do you remember the famous longest pause on the radio? You've heard about it?
Yeah.
Now, radio is a medium where you can't have dead air because it's not like a TV where you could have something visually happening. And Jack Benny's character he was very cheap. And so the world's longest radio pause, he said, I was walking in a dark alley, guy comes jumping out at me with a gun and says, your money or your life. Longest pause in radio history. And then he says, wait a minute, I'm thinking. And that joke has been played, I've seen it 5 times on TV in different situations. We interviewed Bob Meyer, the showrunner for Roseanne. He says, we used that joke on Roseanne. Roseanne was saying, you know, the first 2 kids I had were done through Lamaze, natural childbirth. And I decided for my 3rd kid, I didn't want to go through the pain again. So I went to my doctor, said, hey, how about some drugs? He says, you know, I'd like to help you, but you're taking a risk. Because of your weight, it could injure you or the child. What do you want to do? I said, what I'm thinking. Same joke.
Same joke.
I've seen that same joke on Big Bang. I've seen it on How I Met Your Mother. Now, one of the interesting things we talk about all the time with comedy writers is what we refer to as switching, where you take a joke and you just put it in a new context, but it's the same joke. Every good comedy writer, a nice rule for everybody listening, if you know anybody who's a comedian or a comedy writer, never go up and say, I've got a great joke for you, because they know them all. And they not only know them all, but they have that incredible ability to take them and reuse them, repurpose them, so that unless you really knew the joke and the technique of switching, you don't know where it came from. You think they wrote it, but they didn't. Switched it.
Going back to Jack Benny, one of the things that I always found very interesting about him, and I just loved watching him, was that there could be all of this sort of shtick going on around him, just all of this madness, crazy, whatever. And all he had to do was look at the ceiling. And that was it. Mm-hmm. That closed the joke.
His reactions were famous. They were legendary.
Yeah. But, I've rarely seen anybody else who could do it like that.
He had, yeah. But that character was so well drawn. He was an amazing talent. And he had that ability with that look that you're talking about. We looked up at the ceiling. He didn't have to say, wasn't that the silliest thing? Isn't that the craziest thing? He just did it with that look.
And he didn't have to say anything. In fact, he said very little.
Nothing.
It was everything else going on around him. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I've always admired that ability, just that talent that he had.
What's those guys have? There's a great Marx Brothers story where people think that the Marx Brothers would get on stage or they get in the sound studio and they just turn the cameras on and they just be wacky. They have the best writers in the business. And S.J. Perlman wrote for them, Robert Bench. All these incredible writers. And after they would write, they would basically take the show on the road and test it in front of audiences before it ever came on the screen. And there's a famous story about Groucho that he told a joke, and as soon as he came off stage in the wings, the writer came up to him furious and said, "You told the joke, but you didn't move your eyebrows up and down." He says, "I know I can get a laugh with my eyebrows. I had to see if your joke would get it."
Yeah, he was another one. Groucho was another one, but completely on the opposite end of the comedic spectrum to Jack Benny.
Totally.
Yeah.
Totally.
He was just fast and
masters of what they did. And when you're talking about timing, nothing will ever be what Groucho was able to do.
Yeah. That's another show I've always enjoyed is the You Bet Your Life. It's on, You
Bet Your Life.
Again,
those old movies, Night at the Opera, Day at the Races, those are. I remember in a famous Woody Allen movie where he said, "I was about to commit suicide, and I walked into this old movie theater, and they were playing Night at the Opera. I said, if that exists on Earth, there's too much good here for me to take my life." So that turned my life around.
Let's talk about your book.
Yeah.
You've written a book called Now That's Funny, and you basically interviewed a lot of comedy writers.
We were curious to see how do the best people in the world do it. And so we decided to interview some of the best comedy writers in the world and ask them to describe their process for us. And we had amazing people, some legendary folks. We were incredibly fortunate to get them. But what we realized was if you asked somebody to describe their process, you have no idea what you're getting. Is it really the way they do it? Is it the way they think they do it? The way they wish they do it? Or romanticize it? There's a great line, the highest form of fiction is the autobiography. So
interesting.
So we said, that's not the way to do it. So what we did was we wrote a short, generic comedy premise, gave it to each of these incredible writers, and said, develop it for us. We'll watch you actually work. And the analogy that I described the book is this. One time I was in Paris at the Picasso Museum, and beyond words, but as I was sitting there, I had this thought of what would you give if you could have sat on the bench next to Picasso as he was actually creating something. Now imagine if you could create a still life, and then say, okay, Pablo, create it on your canvas. And then take the exact same still life that you created and go to Cezanne and Matisse and Renoir and Degas and Monet, and they would each work on the same still life you created in their own styles, in their own way. So you can actually compare them, watch how they did it. That's basically what we did in our book. And what was fascinating was not only to see this work emerging in real time, it's like, you're peering in their ears, watching their brains be creative, but a lot of them actually were narrating. So they were telling what they were doing as they were doing it. I'll give you an example. The premise we came up with, the long and the short of it, was a 50-ish woman's husband passes away. She thinks she's well taken care of and didn't realize they spent every penny they made. So now she's destitute, has no prospects. So she has to move in with her adult daughter in New York. Well, one of the things that Jeffrey and I talked about as we were starting this project was, do you think these writers are going to go more for story or for character? What would you think?
I'd say character, if it's going to go in a comedic way.
Okay, so this is a trick question, because the answer is neither. They went for conflict. Everything came out of conflict. So let me give you an example. So here's the premise. So this fellow, Walt Bennett, who, among other things, wrote for The Cosby Show, was saying, okay, how am I going to start this out? This woman is coming from across the country to New York to live with her daughter. Well, typically when somebody comes to visit you, you know exactly when they're coming. So imagine the havoc if she came unannounced. Okay, so if she's going to come unannounced, how can I create more conflict? When would be the worst time she could arrive? So, of course, the boyfriend is there. They're in the bedroom. Here's the knock at the door. Says, how can I make it still worse? Well, somebody's coming over. You're expecting to have 2 suitcases. She's got a moving van downstairs and has an entire house. She's got a little efficiency apartment in New York, and as she's knocking on the door, the cousin is trying to lug a big sofa up the stairs that probably won't fit through the door. So all the way through, he's saying, how can I make it worse? How can I create more tension? How can I create more conflict? It was an incredible thing to watch. One of the people we interviewed was a fellow named Bob Meyer, who, among other things, was a showrunner on Roseanne. And this guy was so good that we gave him the premise, and he said, okay, first thing I do is I cast it. In my head, I pick the actors I'd want working on it. So immediately as I'm writing, I know their speech, their cadences, their movements, their looks. So it helps me write because I'm writing for somebody. And it took him like 6 minutes, and he came up with a perfect network sitcom. So I remember Jeffrey said to him, wow, that was incredible. Could you make it darker? He got this look on his face like a mischievous kid. And picture somebody holding a big dial, about to turn it, and he looked at us and said, how dark do you want it? And all of a sudden, the sweet New York girl became a private detective with a drug habit. And he got really, really dark. And it was all right there. Just we suggested it, they did it. An interesting thing for me was almost every one of these writers basically said to us, I've been doing this for most of my life, but I'm no nervous doing this. And we asked them why. I said, because I've got one shot at this, and then I'm going to be compared to my peers. And just about everyone mentioned the pressure and the anxiety of doing this, and yet every one of the things they came up with was unimaginably good. One of the things that I was afraid of, Jeffrey and I talked about this, was there was an old I Love Lucy episode where Lucy and Ethel were angry at each other, and they were not talking, and all of a sudden they show up at a swanky party wearing the same dress.
Oh, I remember that one.
In the 50s, that was a classic episode. So we said, what happens if they all come up with the same story? And every one is so vastly different. And we were really fortunate. we got to interview, just before he passed away, Sherwood Schwartz. Do you know who he was?
Yeah, he produced the
Sherwood
Brady
was
Bunch, didn't he?
He created the Brady Bunch,
right.
and Gilligan's Island.
Gilligan's Island, yes.
We interviewed Peter Casey, who co-created Wings and Frasier. And one of the interesting things in the book was a lot of the writers mentioned to us, we do lots of interviews, but I find myself telling stories that I don't normally tell in interviews because of the way this interview is conducted. When we were talking to Peter Casey, he had a great story for us. Were you a Frasier fan at all?
Not a huge one, no, but I do remember the show.
The premise was it's a spin-off character who was sort of a loser on Cheers, but now he gets a new shot at life. He moves to Seattle, and he's a semi-celebrity, and he has an apartment in one of the top buildings in Seattle with an incredible view, hires a top interior designer to make this perfect apartment, and at the last minute his father moves in. And I had asked Peter, what was the story about the chair? I don't know if you remember, but there was like a really ugly Barca lounger that his dad brought with him. And it was horrible looking, it was torn and had pieces of duct tape. And he said, we treated that character we treated the chair like a character. He says, we found the ugliest design we could, and then we found the ugliest fabric. Then the set designer came in with a whole book of that fabric pattern in every color. And we picked the worst possible match. And that chair was a symbol to Frasier that you're never going to have the perfect life you planned. That every time you walk into your new, beautiful apartment, you're going to see that chair and say, it's not happening for you. Here's your daily conflict.
I think that's a good analogy because it seems like when you go through life and you're planning to do something and then something else always happens, it seems to be one continuous cycle of duct taping. Really. You
nailed it. You nailed it exactly.
Yeah.
That's exactly what he went for, and you got it. Yes. Good one.
So the book is called Now That's Funny. How long has it been out?
Been about a month and a half, maybe 2 months.
Couple of months?
They're pretty recent.
Yeah.
Yeah.
How's it doing?
It just came out. Yeah, we're very excited about it. One of the nice things is that a number of screenwriting professors are now adopting it and using it in their classes as textbooks.
Oh, cool. That's a good thing.
And the interesting thing that we talk about all the time is there are a number of people who have books out about writing. And they give you the impression that there's one way to write, and here it is. By page 12, you need to have an inciting incident. By page 19, you have to, just before the end of Act 1, you have to, and these guys do it every way you could imagine. And they shatter that myth that there's a way to do it. And you see totally different approaches from each person. It's a wonderful thing if you're a writer to just follow how these people attack what they're doing. I remember Charlie Peters, who wrote the 3 Men and a Baby, lots of wonderful movies, was telling us, for example, here's a device I use called the third object, where when you have two characters and they're both looking at the same thing, but in a totally different way. He gave the example from Beauty and the Beast, where he said there was a scene where they were having a beautiful dinner outside, and all of a sudden the wolf was by the wall. And Beauty looked at it and became really fearful, and then the Beast looked at it and started salivating and growling. And all of a sudden, you didn't have to say anything else. You totally got both their characters and how they differed, just by the way they looked at this third object.
I'm going to pull this all together here. You talked about the ugly Barca lounger, and I've been watching reruns of Let's Make a Deal on YouTube because Monty Hall just passed away a few days ago, and I loved that show when I was a kid. When they gave away furniture and appliances from the early 70s, this is how I looked at the stuff. When the curtain opened, I went, oh, because they were always in that horrible avocado green or that mustard yellow color, and they gave away those lazy boy loungers that were like mint green and shag carpet, orange shag carpet, just absolutely horrible stuff. And I'm looking at it just going, ugh, you know, and yet everyone in the audience is all going, ooh, you know. So it's funny.
Exactly.
You know,
exactly.
Especially,
And it's that ability to show how people differ by looking at their different reactions to the same event or the same object. You nailed it.
Yeah. Now, in all fairness, I don't remember what my reactions were back then. Maybe we didn't know any better, and would go out and spend $500 on a mint green lounger. But these days, it'd be horrible.
I remember as a kid liking burnt orange as a color for furniture.
Burnt orange.
Look at it now and shudder. Burnt orange.
And burnt orange was a great color for some cars too. I think the Pinto that came out in the early 70s. It was
Pinto.
Yes, burnt orange. Burnt orange was one of the fashionable colors that came in.
Whoever thought that a Pinto would become a punchline?
Ford probably didn't.
Well, they also came out with an Edsel, so.
That's true. We got to wrap this up. We actually went over a little bit, and I know you said you had a book signing to
I'm
get to.
so sorry, but thank you. This was really fun.
Well, thank you for coming on the show. I really enjoyed speaking with you. Best of luck with the book. Again, it's called Now That's Funny. It's available at Amazon, I assume, and all the usual online book outlets. Yeah.
Yep. We have no secrets.
Okay.
All out there in the open.
All right, super.
Thank you very much.
Thanks again.
Appreciate it.
You're listening to Mr. Smooth and Savvy right here on The Douglas Coleman Show. We'll be right back after these commercial messages.
Acclaimed author of Garden, Jane Yates brings you the first book in a new trilogy, Octopus Pirate, a story of a foundling who has unusual talents, such as the ability to communicate with octopuses. As a baby, he was washed up on an island off the Scottish mainland. An eccentric former nun who lives alone with cats brings him up. He joins a circus and narrowly escapes plots against him, flees to Cornwall, builds a replica pirate ship that's also an airship to travel back in time to fight real pirates. Get your copy today from Amazon, only 99 cents.
And now...
Hey, Rocky, watch me pull a rabbit out of my hat.
Again?
Nothing up my sleeve. Presto! No doubt about it. I gotta get another hat.
Now here's something we hope you'll really like.
All right, please welcome Loren Weisman. Hi, Loren. How are you?
Hi, Douglas. Thank you for having me.
Oh, thank you for coming on the show. I wanted to ask you real quick. You're in Florida, yeah?
I am.
How did you fare in the hurricane?
I fared fairly well. We didn't have any damage. We had a little power loss, but a good location and better than some of my friends of mine.
Well, you're on the East Coast then?
Yep, up in the Vero Beach area.
Oh, okay, yeah, because the storm was really more on the West Coast where they got hammered, yeah.
They were pointing it in 9 different directions right till it hit. Nobody really knew.
I know they said Miami was going to get hit, and then it moved west of Miami. I mean, it was crazy, that storm, yeah.
Yeah, no, it's strange. I mean, I guess it just comes down to you really can't predict the weather.
Glad you made it okay. I know that I had 2 people cancel out on interviews that I was going to do because they had no power, no internet, nothing. So,
wow.
Anyways, off with the weather, on to something else. Your bio was very impressive, but I'm not quite sure I understand what it is exactly you do. So if you could explain, let me just read this part. It says, brand precision marketing strategist and counselor. Okay, well, that's very impressive. But why don't you explain that so that people who have no idea what that means will have a better understanding of what exactly it is you do?
Of course. Well, quick story short. I came from the music industry. I came up as a session and ghost drummer, and I got to do a lot of albums from behind the scenes, and I watched everything from various budgets, things that worked, things that didn't work, different levels of successes. And as I went to producing and then into consulting for the music business, I found a similarity inside of the marketing, the branding, and the promotion of music that was comparable to all businesses. And where a lot of people mistake the idea of a brand just being a logo, the brand really comes down to, and the strategy around the brand is everything that you're putting out, the message, the tone, the timbre, the professionalism, and the content. And when that's strategized correctly, it's easier to reach the audiences that you want to reach to potentially convert them.
All right. Let's go back to your music time in the music industry a little bit. What years were that you were in the music industry?
I jumped in 92 and went through, I'd say it was 15 solid years. I mean, I've still remained in the industry in a way as a consultant, but I was running around the world between 92 and I'd say 2004 was when I started to shift gears and get a bit more toward producer, getting off the road and such.
Okay. So you were a session musician, or were you
I was a session musician, but at the time, I mean, it was in that time of the ghosting where I had a friend of mine in New York say, "You're too tall, hairy, and scary to be a rock star," but I can get you playing for a lot of the rock stars if you can keep your mouth shut. And, the old story of, it wasn't always Ringo on the drums. The Beach Boys had their session musicians. We came from a time, I mean, this was the 60s, the 70s, the 80s, and the early 90s where the image and the brand was key. And they were bringing in the cats that could keep their mouths shut. I mean, the highest pinnacle of my career as a drummer was the fact that a lot of people had heard me, but nobody had heard of me. And that worked well for me.
Well, it's funny you say that, because that's a conversation I have with many musicians that I have on the show. And I'm always the one I'm still a little bitter that MTV sort of changed the whole scope of the music industry, because I grew up in the 70s when it was just about the music. Nobody cared what you looked like. And I always talk about how ugly some of the really good bands were back then. Because nobody cared. Nobody cared. Look at some of the Steely Dan pictures from the mid-70s. Oh, my God. Those guys were hideous, But their music was fabulous, it was fantastic. And actually, to their credit, I know that Walter Becker just passed away, but they looked a lot better now. Donald Fagen and Walter Becker, like in the last couple of years, they look good. They had short hair and corporate suits, and I mean, they looked like, nice-looking guys in their 60s or however old they were, probably 60s. But back in the 70s, when they were in their 20s, I mean, they looked like they just fell off the dirt wagon. And
I'm friends with Elliot Randall. I'm gonna tell him you said that.
Okay.
No, I'm just teasing.
Well, listen, they couldn't have taken themselves too seriously in the looks department back then. I mean, come on,
No, it was a beautiful thing that it was about the music.
It was all about the music.
Yeah. Oh yeah, and I mean, I look to a time. I mean, there were signs of it even in the 60s and 70s where brand was happening. It was behind the scenes enough where the investors would put the money into the music that was going to be out there. So the presentation of the music was stronger. But then that brand took over. I mean, the oversaturation of the industry, and then at the same time, the logistics. How are we going to make money? The extensive failure of what Woodstock was, not in the event that it was and what it meant to people, but that was a massive changing point and turning point for how do we market to create the business side. And I'm first and foremost a music lover, but you do have to realize it is a business, and the business had to change into that brand. It's not where a lot of people wanted it to go, but had it not changed there, I wouldn't have had the career I had.
Well, yeah, true. Although if you had grown up 20 or 30 years before, you would have been doing something else.
Very true.
If MTV had never happened, or if you had started in, the 1950s, you would have been on a completely different road with the music. But that's neither here nor there. Let's get back to the brand thing, because you said something that's very true, and actually I thought that for a long time. You said that the brand, or your brand, is not just your logo, that it encompasses a lot more of what your business is. So try to break down what brand means, because you hear it all the time. Everybody talks about, oh, your brand, this brand. Tell us a little bit more about what brand encompasses.
Well, it's that idea, like we said, you're beyond the logo. The logo is key, though. What is a color scheme? The recognition today in 2017 of someone feeling comfortable with a brand, that has to take place, because people are being inundated with an attack, a rage of attacks coming from the force and the dominance of like me, follow me, share me, come to this gig, buy this album, buy this song, vote me, donate to me. Now, inside of a strong brand, to be able to get a sense of the story that can be told about each band member, or the stories that can happen about the music outside of the music. The biggest, to wrap it all in and simplify it, a correct brand that hits the messages on the directly relating front to the obscure and vicarious relating elements is going to allow the biggest fan to want to stay engaged, while the person that's just heard of them and hasn't crossed over, they want to be engaged. To the person that's never heard of them, they find that interesting and want to be engaged. And that brand then lays out in what kind of photos are you taking? What's the overall message? What kind of story, the ego, the presentation, what you're going to share, what you're not going to share? Do you have to go to politics? Can you stay away from religion? Do you want to be religious? All those decisions formatted in a blueprint of sorts will allow people with each piece of content, with each show that they create, making it more than just a show, but an event that can compound for their marketing to reach more and more people. And when people are in that zone, that's a brand that can set people for realistic success.
Wow. I was just thinking it was just about the music, man. Yeah, there's so much more going on with that. All right, so let's take a band that's up and coming or just starting out. How would you offer your services to them? Let's say, okay, they got a good sound, the music is solid, but they don't have a particular direction or a particular style. It's just like four guys, How would you whip them into shape? How would you whip their brand into shape?
In this thing, it's coming together to figure out what is going to be the bio, what is going to be the tagline that has to sit with them till they no longer need a tagline. What's going to be the budget? Now, this is the three level operations of budget. If they had everything that they needed, if an investor sat down and said, "What do you need so that I can get my money back plus interest, and all of you guys are getting out there," to lay out a business, and this becomes part of the strategy, to lay out that plan, not your template business record plan of the 90s, like a lot of people still claim to use, but more of figuring out, where could they hit? Is this a band that could do better overseas? Is this a band that has really catchy elements that could go into licensing for television, for movies? Are they really good looking? Could they be in television or movies as a band? Looking at every possible avenue of revenue to achieve sustainability, whether they get the largest investment or whether they have to work with the money that they have. That is where I like to start and then hand off to whether it be an investor or whether it be a manager. Too many bands are going right up to management, and these managers, they don't know what they're doing. Maybe they worked with a band in the 90s or the early 2000s, and they're saying, "Oh, I did this and I did this with this person." It's, well, that's wonderful, but that person had a $500,000 budget and we have $5,000. It's a totally different story. Yeah. So it really, what I tend to do with bands is more business and brand organizational, to give them a foundation for them to then decide which direction do they want to go.
Well, it's interesting you mentioned managers, because even that element of the music industry has changed. A lot of these guys that I've seen now are taking the money up front from the band, which never happened before. It was always on commission. And I've seen more managers saying, "Oh, well, we take a flat fee," which I never kind of liked that idea. I understand somebody like you would have to pay up front because you're providing a service right away. But a manager could take your money and say, "Gee, sorry, I couldn't get you any gigs."
Exactly. And that's one of the things I tell. I mean, some of the people, whether they work on a project with me or they hire me for an hour, I give them a lot of those red flags. Now, the 90%, and it is at that 90% level of these scam managers, they're looking for that money because, just like you said, they're not doing the work and they're just trying to make every buck that they have. Bands need to take, and artists need to take a look at the due diligence of any given situation. What has this person done? Who have they worked with? I want to be able to talk with them. I want to be able to find out what your plan is, because it should be a percentage. Now, if a manager is saying, well, we need to buy in for graphics, we need to buy in for certain studio, we need to do X, Y, and Z. Okay. There's a legitimate and moral money. But yeah, this upfront thing, so I can manage you. Yeah, if that doesn't set off every red flag, whoever's thinking that, they're going to be in a world of trouble.
Well, and it's funny because you would think, when I've seen these guys, and I've had a few approach me about, doing the radio show and kicking it up a notch or two. And, well, it's $1,500 for 1 month. And I'm like, yeah. And what are you going to do exactly? You're going to send a few emails out? No, thank you. So, but there are a lot of them is what I'm saying. And, people really need to be careful.
It's the scariest part. And that's the part that, and there are a lot of people that call themselves brand strategists. There are a lot of people that call themselves music managers. It is just as much the responsibility of the artist to say, I need to look a little bit deeper than the hype. And when if they respect, I tell every artist this, and I said this in my second book, I say, if people would treat their careers and their dreams like a living, breathing child, they would take so much better care of their art, of their future, and of their dream. If they put in the doubts and stop saying, wow, this person is telling me everything I've always dreamed of, I'm just going to listen, and then said, would I do that for my child? Most of the time, the answer would come back no. And so that's my biggest thing, is I want to see people treat their careers like a living, breathing being that came from them. And in turn, they'll do more due diligence. They'll check up on people. They'll ask the questions, and they'll make sure that they would do nothing to harm their child.
Right. I'm looking at your second page on your bio, and you've got a huge list of all of these different types of clients. Now, have you worked with all of these different types of clients before? Or currently?
Yes, it turned into a funny thing. I was on tour for the Artist's Guide to Success in the Music Business book. We did 63 cities in 73 days, and halfway through the tour, more people were coming out that were not musicians. And I'd always ask, like, where are the drummers? Where's this? Where's that? And slowly the numbers got down. And some friends of mine had started to say, these tactics apply to other businesses. And it was funny at first when I got a call from a lobbying firm, which I've never done anything in politics, and they wanted some ideas. And then I got in touch with a doctor, a plastic surgeon, and these small little one-off things, they became fun. It was fun to create. It was fun to look at the situation and look with a different set of eyes to, almost refresh or bring something new to the table. I feel like a detective, and it's as exciting as when I was drumming, because I'd sit down and we didn't know where the album was going to go. We didn't know where the song was going to go. There was something fresh and new and exciting, and that's come back in doing all of this stuff.
It's interesting you call it a detective, because I think that's a good way to look at it. It really is about exploring all of the avenues that are going to be the best for your particular brand or product. It's not, going back to the music, it's really not like it was where, okay, just get the guys in the studio, make the best album you can make, and it's going to sell because the music's so good. It just doesn't work like that anymore, unfortunately.
Yeah. You couldn't be more right. And it's so unfortunate. The problem that we run into over that, though, is that so many people just long for that day. And as opposed to saying, okay, if I want to be a musician today in 2017, or even what I was doing when I started in the 90s, my path to success was acceptance of what I could change and what I could do, I of course looked at, but then it was making the choices in the situation I was in to allow those to flourish. That's what allowed me to get where I was.
with everything being online, is primarily most of your work done online?
I meet a lot of people. There are people that will fly into my neck of the woods. Most of my clients are still in Los Angeles, New York, overseas, and we do a lot of work via video, which makes it easy. In the winter months, it's a little bit easier. They all want to fly down where it's warmer. Nobody wants to come down to this area with the hurricanes right now, though.
Well, that's true enough. Give me one quick example of a company maybe that you started working with that really had no clue what they were doing, and then you kind of put them on the right path. Do you have any stories like that? Yeah. You could take
an example of a tax client, an enrolled agent. I don't know how familiar you are with tax agents. I wasn't that familiar with them. I had the basics. I've been paying my taxes. I've dealt with some tax issues, but in learning about how an enrolled agent works, how they are, the best at what they do above CPAs. It was finding and discovering with them and continuing to discover with them, they're still clients, about different avenues to promote them to people. And the fun thing about this tax group is somebody that needs help with taxes, somebody that's in trouble with their taxes, they're not in the best mindset. They're not very happy. So immediately we have certain fears and whatnot, walls are up. So it was all a thing. And how do we break down certain walls? How do we create something a little bit more fun to talk about things that are a little bit more dry? So a lot of that, it wasn't changing anything in the skills of this enrolled agent. He already has all the experience, his persona, his intelligence. He was fine. It was going in to brand the message to reach a wider audience of people that had walls up, that have hesitation, and explain, hey, I know it's scary, but you've got to deal with this. And if you don't deal with it, you're going to be in a world of trouble, without saying those exact words. It's been a lot of fun with them.
Well, I tell you, if you can make paying taxes fun, you're doing all right.
I love that.
I can't think of anything less fun, than doing your taxes or paying them. But right.
The biggest thing that we have to think about as musicians, as if you're launching a reality show, if you're writing a book, if you have a radio show, the perception versus the intention is one of the biggest things that artists miss. They have the greatest intentions. They mean it from their heart. But in the perception of what's being presented, it can keep people away. I have another client. She's more in the self-help area. She's outstanding, but she has to deal with the fact, and she's finally dealing with the fact that there's so many of the curbside prophets, so many of the fake ones. I mean, this woman started as a Vietnamese refugee, made millions, but did it herself and did it through a method that she created. So in explaining her story, we're also highlighting branding and building content to showcase authenticity and authority. So in the same way for all the podcasts that are out there, television shows, radio, albums, singers, songwriters, to bring in that authenticity in a world that can feel so sterile and fake can help people stand out that much more. And sometimes what you say, even though it's from the heart, it's not being heard the way you want other people to hear it in their heads.
Okay, I'm trying to wrap my head around that concept. You're talking about authenticity, meaning it's not just some plastic person that has no interesting story behind them to sort of...
I mean, it's a mixture of no interesting story, but where do they come from? Read my book. Why? Well, it's good. Give me a little bit more about the book. Give me a little bit more about your show, about your story, about your music. We've got a great album. You've got to download it. Why is it great? What elements, what are the descriptors of explaining funny stories about how a song came to be? The experiences of how the band came to be. This is the stuff that the public is hungry for. And when people take the brand there, then that draws them to that music, and that music or book or business gets the attention it's looking for.
I mean, do you think technology has really crippled people's attention span? Because
absolutely,
it seems to me that, people can't sit and read an entire book anymore, or even listen to an entire 3-minute song. it's amazing that when you stream on the streaming services, as long as people listen for 10 seconds, you'll get the penny. And it's just amazing to me that, anybody would listen to a song. I mean, unless it's really awful and you put it on for 10 seconds, go, oh, and you just click it off. But if it's a good song, I mean, you want to listen to the whole thing. If it's a good book, you want to read the whole book, right? It just seems like
Absolutely.
people don't have that much attention anymore, that the internet is so fast that, click, 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 you can go on 1,000 different websites in a half an hour. And
you couldn't be more right. And that's one of the things that, as we accept that and alter our brand for people to meet that, now it's not going to win over everyone, but what is going to, as opposed to Facebooking or tweeting 200 times a day like some people do, what can you begin to share with technology that will draw people to you? That engagement is how you combat that, that OCD element. You're not going to get everybody, and people will pass you. But when you start thinking about, okay, people's attention spans aren't there. What can I do to grab their attention for a second? How can I shorten the headline on a post? How can I bring a sample of a song to allow it to fade in and fade out, just to tease them, the foreplay of what they're creating. And then from there, they stay a little longer and a little longer. And yeah, you won't keep everyone. And as a whole, yeah, you're absolutely right. We've lost that attention span. But when we understand that and play into that, there's a chance you'll be able to capture the attention span of some.
It's like those ads that they run on YouTube where you're going to watch a video and then an ad pops up and it says, you can close this ad in 5 seconds. You know the one I'm talking about?
Yeah.
You have the option of watching the whole ad, and some of them are damn long. Some of them I've seen. I saw one that I was sort of interesting, and so I didn't close it. And then the time counter came up, and it was 18 minutes long. Meanwhile, the video I was trying to look at was going to be about 6 minutes long. And I thought, 18 minutes, Jesus, So anyways, I clicked off on it. But apparently YouTube pays as long as you watch that first 5 seconds. So
I'm not sure the exact payment systems of that. I mean, it is, but you're right. It's unfortunate. I mean, these ad placements, some of these people are just making their money off of the ads. I mean, and that's, and yeah, an 18-minute ad or inside of that OCD, somebody wants to watch a video and they click away. They click away because they have to wait now 20 seconds. I mean, it's unfortunate, but it's the playground or the battleground that we have to face every day.
Oh, I like the battleground. Yeah, that's it. The internet is the fight on the the online fight to get noticed. Really. Do you have one client that sort of dominates your business more than the other?
Not right now. There are different projects that get a little bit bigger. We were working on a layout for a reality TV show that may be seeing the light of day in the middle of next year. And that took over a whole bunch of time. There was, I went back to working with a record label for a bit. We were laying out budgets for a series of different bands. But again, in that sort of detective and the discovery element, I like working with people on shorter bases, on an hour, on X number of sessions in a given month. That it keeps it fresh, it keeps it exciting. And at the time, for 5 clients that I might be talking to, the 6th client that could have nothing to do with any of those 5, I get some ideas, and it all intermingles. It cross markets, and we find different ways to brand and different ways to strategize inside and outside of someone's genre or someone's business style.
Okay, let me go back to another thing. We were talking about the logo. How important is the logo? I mean, is that really going to draw people in?
I think it's less about drawing people in as it is the psychological comfort of it. The idea that it's consistent. It's not just in the logo, but the similarity from the header of your website to the avatar that's the same everywhere to the color scheme, that if I'm on your Twitter and I click through to your website, that your font, your logo, the basic information is very, very clear. We're in a world right now of spam of all these, all these bugs and stuff online. And when somebody clicks through somewhere else, and they've shown this, Time Magazine did a really cool article on it, of talking about the uneasiness of traveling to different sites. And even more so inside of that brand, that logo, that color, that font, that basic information, if it's the same, it helps for that longer term engagement. Where some people, it's, wow, here's a really funny picture here. Here's something else there. It mixes around, it confuses, and it can scare people away from connecting.
I remember studying stuff like this back in the good old days and in business. And, even then the people were talking about logos and brand recognition. This was long before the internet. But in those days, it was like the two biggest logos that they were using as examples were Coca-Cola and McDonald's. Now, there's the ultimate success with a logo, because you see a Coca-Cola sign or the Golden Arches, and you know exactly what it is. You know exactly what you're going to get. I think that's less significant. I mean, not to say their logos are less significant, but I think overall, people's logos would be less significant because there's just so many of them these days. Yeah.
I think that with Coca-Cola, though, in McDonald's, you have something so large and there was so much money behind it, in the sense of, okay, let's say the local band, and they hand off a set list that has a letterhead that has their logo, their font, maybe the color in there. And then somebody or an artist contract, and somebody sees the same theme crossing onto a business card as it is on their website, as it is on their social media. Then from the standpoint of an investor, from the standpoint of management, from the standpoint of PR, certain things are already developed and they have that foundation to be built on. Yeah, I mean, there isn't that necessarily that need for the massive Coca-Cola thing on that kind of crazy level, but the consistency and their uniformity oftentimes is so off and so just all over the place. When somebody has that logo that's consistent, it's showing up on their merchandise. It's somewhere on the back of an album. It's on a download card. It's on a banner. It's on the bass drum. It's everywhere. That becomes that much more memorable.
Okay. That's a good point. Yeah. The Beatles, their logo, they had that on the drum set all the time. But
the Who? Led Zeppelin?
Right. But it carried through. You know what I mean? So now everything you see with the Beatles has that font.
Oh, absolutely.
Right.
And that's why when that's an area where to have that uniformity, it carries through in the mind. I mean, like for somebody that remembers a cool logo, or, I mean, is your logo, outside of having the words on it, something that could serve as a cool T-shirt? Maybe it doesn't even have your band name or your band font underneath it. Is that something that could go onto a glass? Can it be seen on a pen? And can it be on a banner behind you that's, 20 feet tall? The adjustment of something that can fit anywhere and everywhere to represent you, both with your words and without them, to draw and maintain that recognition, is everything in a day right now where so many people are being thrown so many different images, selfies, logos, memes, all of it. And that one piece of consistency, it is psychologically proven to calm someone, to slow someone down, and maybe it will slow them down, maybe to engage.
That's heavy. That is really. Oh, by the way, what's a meme? I keep hearing that. I don't know what it is.
That's one of those images where they put the text on it, usually, some kind of sarcastic joke, something funny or serious, and then it's basically writing on a picture that a lot of people post online.
Writing on a picture. Oh, all right. Like a caption?
Yeah.
I've heard that all over the place. I never knew what it was. Loren, we're kind of out of time here. Let's see. Your website is Loren Weisman, WEISMAN.com. And if somebody wants to get in contact with you, they can go through the website. Is that the best way?
They're welcome to go through the website. On the front page of the website, there's a question form for an initial meeting if they want, and if they say that it came from the Douglas Coleman Show, I'll throw them 25% off anything they do.
Oh, okay, that's great. Thank you so much for coming on. I've actually learned a few things today. This was very informative and entertaining and educational.
Thanks for having me, Douglas. It was great talking to you.
Well, that's about all the time we've got for the show today. I want to thank my special guests, Peter Desberg and Loren Weisman. This is Douglas Coleman saying goodbye. To the mile, you've got to